Welcome to the US-Canada Ambassador Listening Session. This session will feature a commentary on current events impacting the US and Canada border and trade between the two countries, with Canada's Ambassador to the United States, Kirsten, Hillman, and US Acting Ambassador to Canada, Chargé d'Affaires, Katherine Brucker. In order to increase the openness of our discussion, this session is being held under Chatham House rule. Anyone at the meeting is free to use information from the discussion, but please don't identify who made any comment. This session is part of the Rising Economy Week, an immersive week-long virtual event co-hosted by the South Island Prosperity Partnership and the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, which is a statutory public-private nonprofit created in 1991 and includes Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, the Yukon, and Northwest Territories. We will be excited to take part in this entire series, and we're happy to be co-hosting this with the South Island Prosperity Partnership. We are going to have the session today in two parts. We'll begin by hearing from our two ambassadors, and then we'll go to two separate panels. The first panel will focus on trade issues, and the second panel will focus on border issues. So now I would like to introduce our ambassador, the Canadian ambassador to the US, distinguished record, Ambassador Hillman. She has worked a long time in the trade file and knows it so well. And Ambassador, I'm hoping that we're coming to an easier time in US-Canada relations. I've been doing this also a long time, and I'm really looking forward to an opportunity for enhancing the most important relationship, certainly the largest trading relationship in the world. Back to my introduction. So Ambassador Hillman was appointed on March 26, 2020, but she had been serving as acting ambassador from August 2019 until that nomination. Prior to that, she was the deputy ambassador in Washington since August 2017. Before joining the embassy, Ambassador Hillman held the position of Assistant Deputy Minister of the Trade Agreements and Negotiations Branch at Global Affairs Canada, overseeing all of Canada's trade policy and trade negotiations. She was also Canada's chief negotiator for the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. Ms. Hillman has held various positions at home and abroad, including Associate Assistant Deputy Minister of Trade Policy Branch and the Senior Legal Advisor at the Permanent Mission of Canada at the WTO in Geneva. We're really grateful to have Ambassador Hillman with us, and I'd also like to invite and introduce our Chargé d'Affaires for the US in our embassy in Ottawa. Katherine Brucker is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service. Her assignments include both bilateral and multilateral work, as well as extensive experience on the Secretary of State's staff. She began her career in '94 as an economic officer in Port-au-Prince, working on economic development in a post-conflict society. Then went to Bonn in 1996 as a consular officer. And following that, spent a year in DC and then joined the US mission to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in Vienna. And she worked on good governance, counterterrorism, as well as the Balkan and Central Asian issues. Her key achievements include winning an agreement from all 55 OSCE participating states for action on terrorist financing and enhanced travel document security. Leaving Vienna in 2005, she headed the political, economic, commercial section at the embassy in Cameroon. Then in 2008 to 2011, she was in Leipzig, Germany, the only US diplomatic mission of the former East Germany. From 2014 to 2017, she was in Gabon, and since 2017, she went to Cote Cote d'Ivoire. In August 2020, she arrived as the Deputy Chief of Mission in Ottawa. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to turn it over for some brief remarks, first to Ambassador Hillman. Ambassador. We have you on mute, Ambassador. Oh.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. So thanks, Matt. Thanks very much for having me join you. It's really a pleasure to speak with you today, and it's a real pleasure to be joining Chargé d'Affaires Katherine Brucker as well for this conversation. So it goes without saying that all of our lives have been turned upside down in recent months. And we've really had a moment of upheaval that is unprecedented in so many ways. And I'd like to focus in my brief remarks this morning on how during this moment of upheaval, Canada and the US have really stepped up like never before in collaborating both nationally, but also locally and regionally to protect the health and security and well-being of our citizens. And when I think about this period that we've been through and that we're still going through, I think about it in waves. The first wave was Canada-US collaboration and cooperation to get our citizens home. And I don't know if you can, cast your mind back to February, March, April, and we were bringing Canadians and Americans home from all over the world. We were getting people off of cruise ships. We were flying them home in each other's charter planes. It was a moment where we were really working together to meet the demands of that particular moment in time. It was followed up by, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, managing the border and making some difficult but important decisions around the border. Then continued collaboration around supply chains and making sure our supply chains were working for our essential products, but also the food security and manufacturing, and making sure our economies could work as well as they could under the circumstances. And another wave has been the collaboration on the development of treatments and vaccines for COVID. So as the pandemic has progressed, so has our cooperation, so has our integration in trying to manage in bilateral terms the way that we are able to protect our citizens while also minimizing, to the extent possible, the impact on our economies. And I know that border and trade are two themes for this session, and so I'll just say a few things about those. First, on the border restrictions. The decision to limit discretionary travel across the US-Canada border was historic. And I don't think I need to explain to the people on this call, who I know have been impacted greatly, and I know and are facing challenges on both sides of the border with respect to some of those restrictions. And if we put this in context, the Canada-US border, the land border, is the busiest land border in the world. Under normal times, we have up to 400,000 or more crossings every single day. It's a border that supports $2 billion a day in bilateral trade. So we can't underestimate the magnitude of the decision. And I often point to the fact that from the moment that we thought that decision needed to be made, to scoping out the parameters of the decision, to making the decision, and then having our agencies implemented, it took less than a week. And for those of you who work with big governments, you'll know doing anything in less than a week is a challenge in and of itself. Doing something of that magnitude in less than a week is a true testament to the time we are in, but also to the depth of trust and collaboration that exists from the top right down to the working level in our border management. And the measure is designed, right, to limit discretionary travel, to limit non-essential travel, but to allow the free flow of commerce. And it's doing what it was designed to do. It's not without challenges for communities and individuals and families. We know that, and all of us feel it. But it is doing what it's designed to do, because traffic across our Canada-US border, depending on the region, is down by 80 to 98%. However, truck traffic and commerce is very limited, affected to a very limited extent. So truck traffic, again, it sort of depends on the region, is down from like 1% to maybe 8%, depending on the region. And actual commercial releases, so the stuff that's crossing the borders to go into our supply chains, to go into our stores, to be sold back and forth to each other, isn't really affected at all. The numbers, depending on the week, are up by 1% or 2% or down by 1% or 2%, but basically we're at the same level as last year. And given the moment of time that we're in, frankly, that's remarkable. And it's probably also, you know, if it weren't happening this way, you know, where both countries are suffering economic challenges, but if it weren't happening this way, those challenges would undoubtedly be much greater. So just quickly on our supply chains, the protection of our integrated supply chains has been a priority for both of our governments. Not just essential supply chains, but manufacturing supply chains, food supply chains, the supply chains that run our economies. And the good news is that, you know, those supply chains are, as I say, working well. And in particular, trade in essential products, so PPEs and the components that go into PPEs, is also highly bilateral and highly reciprocal. And decisions that were made to limit the trade in those products, perhaps with other partners, were not decisions that were brought to the Canada-US relationship. In other words, just to be a little more direct, in other words, when the US administration decided to limit the export of certain PPEs from the United States, they exempted Canada and Mexico from those decisions, recognizing the high level of interdependence and collaboration and mutual support that we have. And so I will end. I know that I don't want to, I know this is a listening session, not a talking session, so I'll try to be quick. The last thing I'd like to say is, you know, in the midst of all of this, we do have something important to celebrate, and that is the adoption and entry into force and now implementation of the new NAFTA, USMCA in the United States, CUSMA in Canada, TMEX in Mexico, so I will call it the new NAFTA. This is a very important and historic agreement. It's important and historic for what's in it, the content that is modernized around the way in which we want our businesses to be doing business going forward in the area of digital commerce, for example. But it's also unprecedented because of the level of support that it has from industry in all three countries and the political representatives in all three countries. So it is highly supported in Canada, the US, and Mexico across the political spectrum. That is essential because that means that fundamentally trade agreements are about creating stability for our businesses and our communities so they can rely on the environment in which they're operating. And political endorsement is very important as a factor to underpin that stability. We can talk a lot more about that if people want to. I am conscious of the time. I would just say that you know, these are tricky times. We will get through them. For a region like Penwar, which is innovative and forward-looking, we have a really good history behind us, but we also have an important platform in the renegotiated NAFTA to springboard into you know, economic activity and innovation of the future. Thanks, Matt.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador. And let me turn to Chargé d'Affaires, Katherine Brucker. Katherine?
Thanks very much, Matt, and good morning to everybody. Thanks also for the invitation to this listening session. Certainly, I feel very fortunate at this early stage of my time in Canada to make this important connection with the Northwestern region of both the United States and Canada. And I'm also very pleased to share the virtual stage today with Ambassador Hillman, who I'm meeting, you know, video-wise for the first time. I'd also add that the timing for this session is really fortuitous. We're looking ahead to a transition in the United States. We'll be preparing papers. And so it's really a great opportunity for me to hear firsthand from some important stakeholders as we prepare for changes in Washington. One of the things that I noted when I saw a draft of Ambassador Hillman's remarks is how much what we have to say is actually quite similar. And I think that's very telling in that how closely not only do our two countries work together, but how similarly we see so many important issues. And it's certainly true that the US-Canada partnership is deeper than that of any two countries in the world. We've got strong connections between our border communities, state and provincial governments, business, civic organizations, and of course, between Ottawa and Washington. Penware embodies these extraordinary and valuable bonds. As Ambassador Hillman hinted, and I will say as well, also with this audience, I don't need to run through the massive toll that COVID-19 continues to take on our lives of our citizens, our economies, and on our way of operating. But despite these challenging conditions, we have kept our borders open for trade and essential workers while maintaining temporary restrictions to protect human health and safety. As you know, the US and Canadian governments have agreed to extend cross-border travel restrictions to non-essential travel at least through November 21st. We will continue to assess with Canada how and when we can open the border safely to get our economies fully working again. And we look forward to hearing from you on the challenges you are facing and the opportunities you see to address them. We also know that stamping out COVID-19 is not the last step. A strong North American economic recovery is essential, and our governments are collaborating on numerous economic security and competitiveness issues to support this rebound. We just brought into force the best possible springboard to launch our recovery, a modernized USMCA or new NAFTA that lays the groundwork for a more competitive and economically secure North America. This agreement, as I think many of you know, creates a first of its kind digital trade chapter that will set predictable rules of the road for the digital economy and add stronger intellectual property protections, key components for the tech industry in this region. New provisions will also reduce costs and bring greater ease and predictability to cross-border transactions, something that is even more pressing during this pandemic. Our governments are also working together to strengthen supply chain resiliency of critical minerals to ensure advanced manufacturing companies have access to the minerals they need for cutting-edge communications, battery, semiconductor, and defense applications. We're also prioritizing Arctic security and sustainable development that supports local communities, including indigenous populations. We support rules-based Arctic governance, insisting stakeholders operate with high standards and international norms. We're seeing the rise of aggressive expansionist states like the People's Republic of China, failing to follow a rules-based international order. Instead of becoming a constructive and responsible global stakeholder, the PRC has chosen instead to exploit the free and open rules-based order and attempt to reshape the international system in its favor. Canada has experienced this aggression firsthand. I'm referencing, of course, the PRC's arbitrary detention of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor and formal charges against them, which are outrageous and unjust. We are committed to working with Canada to counter the PRC's malign activity in our countries, which includes the theft of North American intellectual property, exploitation of sensitive research from our universities, infiltration into 5G networks, and attempts to silence critics. With that, I look forward to hearing from Penware members today about some of the challenges and opportunities that exist in our cross-border relationship as we seek to deal with COVID-19. Your feedback and recommendations are invaluable as we navigate these unprecedented times. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We're now going to go to our first panel. For those of you in the audience, we will try to get to Q&As. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom. We'll be monitoring those questions. Our opening panel on trade starts with Patrick Cole, who is the Idaho Potato Commission Director, and he's also chaired our Penware Agriculture Committee for many years. Ryder Lee has had a lot of policy experience in Ottawa with the Canadian Cattlemen Association, now is the president and CEO of Saskatchewan's Cattlemen Association. So we have two ag folks here, one from the US, one from Canada. Bridget Anderson is president and CEO of the Vancouver Board of Trade, has an illustrious career both in the media and in government. We're delighted to have you, Bridget. And Dave Cowan co-chairs our tourism working group. He's also the chair of the Greater Vancouver Victoria Harbor Authority, and is really, because tourism is an export, we really wanted to talk about tourism in this panel. So I'm going to turn it over to Patrick. And as I mentioned, everyone has 3 minutes. So Patrick, over to you.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here and looking forward to our conversations. Somehow my picture just got lost, but there I am. I apologize for the lighting here, and thank you both ambassadors for taking time from your busy schedules to listen to us. I note that just earlier this week, a new massive trading bloc was created with the Southeast Asia Partnership Agreement going into effect. I think that points to the necessity for us to draw from the lessons of this pandemic and use it to understand a path forward. For example, many of our citizens had never experienced the kind of shortages of essential supplies, finding empty shelves in their grocery stores, no meat in the meat case, no sanitary products available. And it would be a shame for us not to take that experience and not use that to help citizens understand that we are integrated economies, that it is important for us to facilitate trade back and forth across the borders and to make certain that food insecurity, stability, and increased opportunities are created when we have the kind of trading system that we envision under the new NAFTA. I appreciate very much the comments that you've made, because I think it points to a brighter future during this transition, where hopefully we will see more emphasis on multilateral trade negotiations take place in the United States as we move into this new administration. So with those comments, Matt, I would turn it over to our next speaker.
Great. Okay, thank you. Ryder, you're on.
Great, and I hope you can hear me. Hello, and thanks all for taking the time to listen to our concerns today. COVID-19 has shown us many things, one of which is how important agriculture is to our economy. And we need to eat, and we need the machinery of food production and distribution to work seamlessly. And it's been good to see our shared border work well for food production as an essential service while restricted for non-essential travel. And we're looking for continued collaboration to ensure buyers, sellers, service providers, and experts can cross the border, even with workable requirements. We need free and open trade between Canada and the United States to continue for live cattle, genetics, and meat. It's a long-standing benefit to both countries. Letting the market demand drive product flows allows for best decision-making and allows for consumers to get what they're willing to pay for. We've seen the benefits of this through NAFTA and now in its successor. Decisions about where to raise cattle, where feed comes from, and where finished product flows to all benefit from the lack of market distortions. The new NAFTA provides that framework that in recent years has seen Penwar states exporting more feeder cattle to Saskatchewan and Alberta for finishing. These things ebb and flow based on feed and other competitive realities. They shouldn't be subject to further border thickening regulation that is happening around the world in response to food origin or local lobbies. The market is providing local and proof of origin goods very successfully without government intervention. One of these loud lobbies is for so-called country of origin labeling. We already have the voluntary opportunity to export meat with a US or Canada claim on it. We don't need government regulations to force us to do that. And many other value chains provide stories with food. There's no need for more regulations in this aspect. What is being asked for over and over is to have government thicken the border for trade in live cattle. And we have to stand strong and say, no, this isn't what is in anyone's best interest. And this brings me to international rules-based trade. North America's science-based regulatory and production systems are under a little bit of siege internationally, especially from, the EU looking to export their precautionary principle-based, uncompetitive regulatory regime. Just as we look to each other for rules-based reciprocal trade in the beef cattle sector, we need to work together to strengthen international bodies to ensure the WTO, Codex, OIE are working to the benefit of our two countries. This will boost our exports off the continent to the benefit of producers in both countries. Otherwise, we're left competing for our own population's plates, which are, a great but limited market. Thanks once again for taking the time to listen, and looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
You made it with 3 seconds to spare, Ryder. Fantastic. We're going to go on to Bridget. Bridget, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. And thank you, ambassadors, for taking some time to listen to us. I'm going to spend a few minutes first talking a little bit about the impact of COVID here in the region, just for some contextual information. And as you all know, British Columbia has the most diversified trading relationships in Canada, but the US is still our largest trading partner. And that relationship, as we've already heard, is more important than ever as we are navigating the unprecedented economic challenges due to this global pandemic. Now, first about the impact of this pandemic in our region, Vancouver as a city region has been among the hardest hit in Canada. Employment in our region is down by 10% compared to February pre-pandemic levels, which is worse than most other cities across Canada. The big reason for this is around travel and tourism, hospitality, and international students coming to our region. And that, along with the increase from working from home, is impacted our downtown core like it has for many of you across the region. I'm looking out the window right now and it looks like a Sunday morning or a ghost town. Capacities anywhere up to 40% of previous levels. The importance of trade in our region. Our gateway sector in Greater Vancouver alone contributes $20 billion to national GDP and supports nearly 185,000 jobs. And Canada and the US has a long and important trading relationship. The value of our province's top 5 exports to the US is $22 billion a year. And it's a wide spectrum of industries that benefit from our trading relationships. But two that I want to specifically focus on for the next couple of moments is examples really from pre-COVID. So our tourism industry in our province employs 138,000 people in 2017, and it generated nearly $5.5 billion in export revenue. Our film industry has been experiencing rapid growth pre-COVID, and is now the 3rd largest motion picture hub in North America. And the creative sector contributes over $6 billion to the BC economy. Both of these sectors have been significantly impacted by the pandemic. Now, one of the keys to economic recovery is collaboration and strengthening our ties in our region. And this is more important than ever, especially with new trade relationships being established, such as the recently announced agreement in Asia that was just mentioned by my colleague, and with a new administration in the United States. Penwar plays a key role in the movement of goods and people between our countries. The majority of goods shipped by truck across the border move through the Cascadia corridor. And health and safety remain a priority, but we must work together to allow for more movement of goods and people. A vaccine is somewhere between a few months away or a little bit longer, but rapid testing is a key solution that would allow for travel restrictions and quarantines to be eased. And this needs to be a priority on both sides of our borders so that tourism, which is one of the most hardest hit sectors, can begin to recover. COVID poses immediate economic and health challenges, but we need to look beyond that pandemic. It is not yet clear what the long-term impacts of the pandemic will have on global trade. Pre-pandemic, our region, as others, were dealing with disruptions in their supply chains, and many expect that to continue with the focus away from globalization. We need to continue supporting and working with government and industry on initiatives such as the Beyond Pre-Clearance Initiative that my friend Jerry will speak about, no doubt, which is doing important work around ensuring Canada's gateway cities can build improved processes and border policies to re-engage our economic activity and our people ties. The long-term closure of the border has begun to have a psychological impact on Canadians, and collectively we must work together to continue to foster and preserve our very special relationship. The changing nature of supply chains, potential for reshoring or cultivating more local suppliers will increase the opportunities and the need for regional collaboration. And this, coupled with the significant people ties and emerging cross-border nexus of technology companies, shows that as we continue to fight and emerge from COVID, we have tremendous opportunities. The global pandemic is forcing businesses to fundamentally change the way we operate, and our region needs to be more competitive than ever. And working together is the only way to ensure success. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bridget. Let's move on to Dave Cowan, CEO of Bouchard Gardens. Dave?
Acting Ambassador Brucker and Ambassador Hillman, it is my pleasure today to represent the Pinmore Tourism Working Group. While tourism is comprised of many types of large and small businesses, at its essence, tourism is a highly sustainable export sector, and the US and Canada are each other's best customer. Importantly, the Pinmore tourism ecosystem is an economic development hydra, driving success in many subsectors. We add value well beyond the dollars generated by annual visitation. We are often the tip of the investment cycle when travelers invest or settle in the destinations they love. Prior to COVID-19, tourism was $1 trillion sector, demonstrating steady year-over-year growth, even through 2008. In Canada, our industry was worth $118 billion and was our largest service sector industry, outstripping other more traditional service sectors. Spread through all Pinmore states and provinces, tourism normally generates over $71 billion annually, employing some 800,000 workers. If we can survive COVID, our sector has a bright and sustainable future because you cannot ever outsource tourism. We trade on the pride in sharing a sense of place and therefore operate in every small town and city. This is important as small and rural communities evolve from extractive primary industries. In our small city, 2 in 5 jobs depend on tourism, and we are on track to lose about $1.4 billion in 20,000 jobs. Over $375 million in tax revenue will soon be gone, and the damage is ongoing. We are presently in the peak sales time for summer 2021, and the sales are not materializing. That means 2 consecutive bleak years. So we have a lot to lose if we don't rescue and restart tourism properly. Looking back, our success was driven by many years of sophisticated strategy. It would be wrong to think that rapid testing, a vaccine, or border opening are the simple keys to rescuing and restarting tourism. The pump that needs to be reprimed is massive, sophisticated, and is growing rusty. As we saw after 9/11, when border restrictions were imposed, it takes years for cross-border travel to normalize and to build traveler confidence. Beyond government's efforts to support tourism and businesses in the near term, we must ask ourselves what we could be doing while the border is closed to plan and ensure tourism rebounds as fast as safely possible. And the solution is simple. We urgently need to constitute a bilateral discussion table for tourism. Here we can review lessons learned from past Black Swan events like 9/11 and find collaborative ways to stimulate regional tourism. At this table, we must ensure government at all levels is aligned and supportive of the safe resumption of travel and are willing to play a key role in encouraging the public to travel. It is imperative that when both governments agree that it is safe to do so, Canada and the US must present a strong, safe, and well-coordinated border reopening message. Then we can discuss further rescue measures and how to protect the future of tourism with consistent, harmonized, and enduring biosecurity procedures. To close, I encourage you to go to the Pinmore website to read about our tourism rebound campaign. You'll see that the principles we talk about form the perfect agenda for the table's first meeting. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Each of you did a great job, and I'd like to hear briefly from the 2 ambassadors. Maybe we'll start with Katherine Brucker and then go to Ambassador Hillman. Katherine, any brief comments? And we'll have more time after we hear the border panel.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks very much. And thanks to everybody for your comments. I might say at the top, there's nobody more than a new arrival in Canada who wants to see tourism reopen. I'm dying to get out and around in the country. And so I think it's clearly very important, as many of you have outlined, and the efforts that are already taking place among many of you to try to figure out how to solve some of this together, to me, is exactly the right type of initiative, because for a lot of these things to be successful, they need to be ground up. It needs to be, come from industry, come from the people who are affected. And I absolutely agree that there are opportunities to use the lessons learned from the pandemic to look at supply chain resiliency and more trade within the market. In this regard, we're very interested at the embassy in hearing more about Foreign Minister Champagne's idea of buy North American, because he's talked about that a little bit, but we're very eager to hear details on it. With respect to agriculture, I would just say that we and Canada will continue to work together to promote international agricultural trade architecture that ensures that our highly efficient North American farmers and ranchers compete on a level playing field in key markets around the world, obviously very important on both sides of the border. And then, generally with respect to border, and I know there'll be a little bit more of an opportunity to talk about it later, we're very interested in watching the results of this international border testing program that just began a couple of weeks ago in Alberta. And this relies on rapid testing and other screening measures that would shorten the quarantine period from 14 days to about 48 hours for eligible travelers. And so this is a very interesting first start. Obviously, we're hoping that it goes well, and interested in seeing how this might start to facilitate some easing of border restrictions. And there are similar efforts going on, I think, at the Vancouver International Airport. So we're very eager to hear more about these and to see how some of these initiatives start out in their early phases. So I will leave it at that for starts and turn it to Ambassador Hillman.
Ambassador Hillman.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks very much. So first of all, I'd like to say kudos to whoever structured this conversation with these four speakers, because I think that it's very clever in illustrating the difference of different sectors of our economy are facing in these COVID times. The challenges are different, the implications long-term are different, the lessons that we're learning are different. And I think that tourism and agriculture are actually perfect ways of illustrating this fact. Look, there's so much to say about this, but let me just comment on a few things. Just picking up on some of the things that Patrick said around essential supplies, shortages of essential supplies, what maybe this has taught our citizens around openness and around the importance of our supply chains. I completely agree. I do believe that we have now a generation of people who have seen that national security is food security is national security in the moment of crisis. And like any aspect of national security, it has a domestic component, and then it has an international collaboration component in order to really address a security issue. In other words, we need to, when looking at anything that is essential to our security, we need to make sure that we are doing enough as a nation on our own to have sort of a baseline of resilience. But we always know, and COVID has illustrated this, 100-fold, we always know that no country can go it alone when it comes to facing real global challenges, whether that be, a military challenge or climate challenge or food security challenge. And so I think that kind of takes me to Ryder's comments, which are around the importance of openness, rules-based trade, predictability, and making sure that our citizens appreciate the fact that if they want to have the diversity of products, the reliability of products in their marketplace, then we as governments have to make sure that we're setting the framework for that. I do think that, obviously the USMCA is useful in that respect, but I also think it's important, and we've definitely learned this in the past 4 years in talking about trade, that at the grassroots level, that citizens understand the degree to which the things that they want and take for granted and expect from businesses like yours require a certain openness. And so when countries are feeling vulnerable and kind of want to turn inward, you need to bring kind of facts to the table to say, okay, but if you do that, the consequences, whether it's, you know, the cool policy was mentioned, but there are many we can think about. If you do that, then here's maybe the consequences of that in terms of the choices that you want in your life. Quickly to tourism and the tourism sector. I mean, there's so much to say. It's clear that there are sectors of our economy that are being hit very hard in a different way. I think that the restart, as was said, I think by Bridget, or maybe it was Dave, but the restart isn't going to be a flip of a switch, clearly, and this isn't the only sector where that is true. I think that collaboration, I think innovation, I think dealing with the psychology of the situation is going to be really important, not just for the tourism sector, but frankly, if we have a situation, which we do, where 80 to 90% of border crossings have gone down, what does that mean for us as communities of people who are used to living and working and studying together? How are we going to make sure that we get back to where we need to be and are better, in fact, come back in a better, more collaborative way? The responsibility of that is on governments to a certain extent, but it's on businesses and communities and schools and civil society and everybody. And so being mindful about that, I think, is really important. And it's in our hands. It's up to us, really. Anyway, lots and lots to say, but maybe I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Hillman. We'll go to the border panel. I'm so excited to invite Jerry Bruno, Vice President of YVR, and the founder and chairman and co-chairman with me of Future Borders Coalition. And then we'll hear from Lori Troutman, who is the director of the Border Policy Research Institute at Western Washington, Ian Robertson, the CEO of the Greater Victoria Harbor Authority, and then Bruce Agnew, who chairs the Penward Transportation Working Group. So Jerry, over to you to talk about Future Borders and what is Future Borders doing in this regard, and what are your hopeful solutions going forward?
Great, thank you, Matt, and good morning, Ambassador Hillman, Acting Ambassador Brucker. First of all, I want to thank you both and your embassy staff. They've been absolutely great partners to work with, and they've been great supporters of our coalition. We started this about 2.5 years ago, and the focus was really to finish the unfinished business of Beyond the Border Action Plan. We were all expecting B2B 2.0, which never happened. So we formed this industry group. It's a binational organization. We currently have almost 70 organizations on both sides of the border. Airports, airlines, ports, railroads, tourism, trade, chambers of commerce, think tanks. So it just shows that there was a vacuum there and a need for this. Now, with the COVID crisis, we refocused our efforts on border recovery. And out of that, we've established 4 task forces. But before we got the task forces going, we published 4 principles for easing Canada-US border closure and other restrictions. First of all, we wanted an approach that was binational and coordinated by both governments. We wanted a phased approach that should be informed by science-based criteria, and a layered risk approach when reviewing entry requirements and other travel restrictions. And lastly, a principle that was based on examining the economic impact of border closures on communities. These should be carefully assessed and inform the path towards easing of border restrictions. Now, the 4 task forces that I mentioned, we have an air border task force, a land border travel task force. Lori Troutman co-chairs that one, and she'll be speaking after me. We have a maritime task force that is focused on recovery of the cruise industry, and a supply chain goods movement task force. one of the cornerstones, we talked about testing at airports earlier. As acting Ambassador Brookman noted, Vancouver is launching a test with WestJet next week. And that's a domestic one, but we're also working on what we call a health pre-clearance concept. And we're working closely with the Seattle airport and Vancouver airport with the idea of, can we do a trial with high-tech workers, Microsoft, Amazon employees that used to fly frequently between Seattle and Vancouver because there's a big base in Vancouver that they have. We used to have what we affectionately called the nerd bird that was harbor to harbor. And now we're looking at doing a trial at the airport. And the idea is to use layered testing. So maybe a test 72 hours in advance, a rapid test at the airport, and then hopefully, and we've got our health agencies on both sides that are actually part of the task force as observers, but giving us some guidance. And hopefully that could eliminate the quarantine. While the Alberta pilot is great and 2 days might work for a lot of segments of travel, when it comes to business travel, when it's a 1 day, same day trip, or you're coming back the next day, even 2 days doesn't work. They'd rather do a video call like what we're doing today. So I think we need to look at when we're looking at these layered tests and approaches to easing border restrictions. We also need to look at purpose of travel, the risk profile of the travelers, and not just have a blanket rule that says everybody's got to quarantine for 14 days or 2 days or whatever that might be. So I'm imploring both of you to encourage your governments to look at that type of approach. Because it doesn't work for fast trips. It might work for vacation, visiting friends and relatives, etc. So looking at different sectors in the market, looking at the risk profiles, and using that to inform your decisions. So I wanted to keep it short. I could talk for hours, but I know I've only got a few minutes. So I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thierry. And there's a lot more information on futureborderscoalition.org. Lori Trepman.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, ambassadors, for being here today. We really appreciate your presence. So I run a research institute whose sole mission is to conduct policy-relevant research on the Canada-US border. And it's become clear that the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we will need to manage our shared border in order for travel to resume. So our long-standing focus on security and efficiency now also needs to incorporate a third element, that of public health. So with that goal in mind, I'm going to present 2 recommendations that I believe should be guiding our bilateral border policy efforts moving forward. And because we're here to provide solutions, my recommendations also include 2 specific pilot projects developed in tandem with the Future Borders Coalition that Jerry talked about, but these ones will be focused on the land border. And there'll be ways to incorporate that element of public health into our border policy. And what I really want to stress today is that we need to start researching and testing these approaches now so that when it is safe to resume cross-border travel, we can have policies in place and we can have data that can ensure that public health is protected. So the first recommendation is to protect the health of border officers and travelers alike by creating a more seamless and touchless processing environment. This can be accomplished through mechanisms such as facial verification, more vicinity readable RFID in our documents, and also virtual adjudications. Given the way that so many of us now are doing business, the way that we're having this winter meeting is through virtual platforms, this should be sort of a low-hanging fruit to move towards. So we recommend a pilot project to test remote interviews for trusted traveler and trader programs, which would eliminate the need for in-person interviews, both protecting public health and increasing the efficiency of these programs. This could start with renewals and then expand to include adjudications for TN status or other visas. US Customs and Border Protection already conducts some remote interviews for marine arrivals, so this isn't, of course, an entirely new concept, but the key here is to do this collaboratively with both CBP and CBSA aligned in their approaches. The second recommendation is to establish a process for health pre-clearance in the land mode that ensures a traveler is COVID-free before they arrive at the border, and that the screening and verification of health information is done away from the border. To test that concept, we are advocating for a Nexus Healthy Traveler pilot project to see how we can streamline that additional piece of health information into border processing in the land mode. So it's really approached similar to what Jerry described, pre-clearance. With this pilot, a traveler would submit test results or proof of a vaccine electronically prior to their arrival at the border. So for example, when I arrive at the border and I scan my Nexus card, the officer in the booth sees only a pass or a fail message regarding my health status and eligibility for entry. This would serve as a proof of concept approach that could again be expanded. And obviously there's a lot of privacy concerns that have to be ironed out on both sides of the border. But again, the key here is to do this collaboratively and really lay the groundwork for a coordinated process by engaging the security agencies and the health agencies in both Canada and the US from the very beginning. So this is what I think is needed from sort of a ground up perspective. Obviously, it's also going to take a lot of top-down collaboration across government agencies and between our two countries to get this right. Certainly in the realm of border policy, we see that US and Canada have proven that we are most successful and most effective when we work together. And so our continued collaboration, and I would say even our deepened collaboration on the border, is really essential for a safe, integrated, and a seamless approach to resuming cross-border travel. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Lori. And let's now go to Ian Robertson in Victoria. Ian?
Good morning, Madam Ambassador and Charge d'Affaires Brucker. It's a pleasure to speak to you today from Victoria, British Columbia. The Greater Victoria Harbour Authority is a not-for-profit organization, and we're responsible for stewarding approximately 130 acres of water and upland properties within Victoria's harbour. Located on our property is the Victoria Cruise Ship Terminal. Victoria, as you may not know, is Canada's busiest cruise ship port of call, where in 2019, we welcomed just over 260 ship calls, 710,000 passengers, and 294,000 crew. Cruise is big business to Victoria. It's worth over $130 million to the local economy and accounts for almost 1,000 jobs. Victoria is very much a people port. We don't move goods or break bulk or any other type of cargo. In addition to a busy cruise season, we also welcome a passenger and car ferry service from Port Angeles in Washington State and a high-speed passenger ferry from Seattle. Victoria also has a very busy float plane terminal that it records over 28,000 aircraft movements every year. Now, like most communities, the COVID pandemic has had a devastating impact upon Victoria with the loss of our cruise business and the borders being closed. That said, we fully support the Canadian government's decision to close ports to cruise until the industry can safely restart. Victoria is playing a leading role in collaborating with other ports across Canada and up and down the west coast of Canada and the United States to ensure a safe restart to cruise. Cruise is worth over $3.3 billion Canadian to the Canadian economy, and just over 2/3 of that, or $2.2 billion, comes from Canada's west coast. Victoria is a strategic port of call in the Alaska cruise itinerary. The majority of our calls, ship calls, originate in Seattle, and Victoria is the last port of call before returning to Seattle after the ships have sailed to Alaska. A requirement of the Passenger Vessel Services Act is a cruise itinerary must include a stop at a foreign port if it embarks at one US port and disembarks at a different US port. Over the years, Victoria has grown its reputation as a highly rated port of call despite the regulatory need to stop. Now, since the COVID pandemic, we have seen tremendous collaboration. Collaboration's been talked a lot about this morning, but we've seen a lot of collaboration between the Association of Canadian Port Authorities and the creation of a cruise committee, the American Association of Port Authorities, the Cruise Line Industry Association, CLIA, Transport Canada, and Health Canada. And we are all advocating for one cruise restart plan to be approved by Transport Canada. We are all working hard to submit that plan based primarily upon the US CDC guidelines, hopefully sometime in early 21. Now, if there is one ask I could make on behalf of the cruise industry in Canada, it would be to allow for kind of a dimmer switch type of restart. What I mean by this is that in the initial month or two, when cruise is safe to restart, consider allowing ships to enter Canadian waters, tie up and allow for provisioning to occur, and permit only passengers on a ship organized shore excursion to disembark. This will go a long way to enable the cruise industry on the West Coast to begin their Alaska itinerary in a safe and controlled way while providing economic benefit to the Pacific Northwest region. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you both today.
Thanks very much, Ian. We are coming to the end of the hour. I'm going to have Bruce go on, but I have asked the ambassadors if they're willing to stay a little bit longer. So for those of you as part of Rising Economy Week, when we get to the top of the hour, you're welcome to stay with us for a few minutes, but you can also go to the next program that starts at 11. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce for 3 minutes sharp. Bruce Agnew.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you, ambassadors. I'll make this about 90 seconds. That should put you back on track. Just some recommendations from the transportation perspective. Let's make sure that the health protocols in Washington, BC, and Alaska are harmonized and consistent to jumpstart the cruise industry. 2019, we had 148 million passengers to Alaska. Last year, 48 took the trip. Let's provide federal support for air carriers to continue to serve rural areas as the airlines consolidate and reduce service. Tomorrow, we're going to hear from Joe Sparling at Air North about the critical air link to the Yukon. Put laid off workers to work by investing in infrastructure and laying fiber. The pandemic has taught us that we need more digital infrastructure and clean energy. Leveraging private sector funding like Canada has done so well with the Asia Pacific Gateway and Northern Territories. Let's explore cross-border governance for high-speed rail, transportation electrification, and connected autonomous surface, air, and marine vessels, vehicles, and aircraft. And finally, let's accelerate new jobs by reforming the archaic intergovernmental permit process while enhancing our environmental laws. And let's bring First Nations and tribal governments in for consultation and partnerships to ensure economic prosperity for all. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce. I've got some fantastic questions for the audience, but I think I better go to our ambassadors for your final thoughts on all that we brought up today. And I deeply appreciate your time to sit with us, and please know that we are always here as your partner to look at the most important relationship in the world and the biggest economic relationship in the history of the world. And we want to see more and more investment into this relationship. So I'll go first to Ambassador Hillman for your comments.
Thanks very much. Thanks a lot. Again, like lots of really interesting comments that we could probably spend a very long time talking about. I think I would say that in terms of a lot of those really concrete ideas, super interesting, and Brandon Lee will work with me to follow up and make sure we understand the details of some of the things that have been put on the table. I think that all the suggestions that have been made go to the point that it's not going to be the flick of a switch. We've got to be preparing for the time when we start to go back to normal. And when we go back to normal, whatever that will look like in the future, it will be a gradual process. It's not going to be a process of, as I say, flipping the switch. But I also would like to say to Bruce, I really appreciate that this session ended with you, because I do believe, as I was saying around the tourism industry and the ag industry as well, I do believe that when we reflect on what we've been through, and when we are working to get out of some of the challenges that we're facing, it is the perfect opportunity to say, how do we go from here and accelerate what we're doing into much more innovative, more efficient, more effective processes, border processes, agricultural supply chains, innovative tourism strategies, whatever the case may be. I do believe that in addition to lessons learned that are sort of difficult, there are going to be lessons learned that are going to be able to make sure that we are even better than we were before as a partnership. Thank you.
Chargé d'Affaires, Katherine Brucker.
Okay, just a few final comments. First of all, I also very much appreciated the very creative, thoughtful, and fairly specific proposals that people have come up with. I would like to say as well that our two countries are already starting to talk about what easing of restrictions might look like at some future time. So I think that that's useful, that we're beginning to imagine what reopening could look like when we get to the point that we determine that we're ready to reopen. On some of the specific ideas about health preclearance and that sort of thing, now is absolutely the right time to be talking about this, because both CBP and CBSA are going to have to be involved. There's going to be a lot to go through with that. And we are, like others, very sensitive to the importance of the cruise line industry, especially in the Pacific Northwest. And as the pandemic allows, our government interlocutors are talking and collaborating with key stakeholders on how we can have full implementation of the landmark preclearance agreement, which provides for an expansion into new modes of travel, including maritime. So we're looking at a number of different things where we can help industry, help individuals, but hearing from you, stakeholders on both sides of the border, is incredibly important as a first start. So I thank you for your time today and for the interesting discussion and the creative ideas.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you both ambassadors. This is just the beginning. We have a lot of work to do. I do want to say to all those in the audience that have put in some fantastic questions, we will be forwarding these questions to both embassies. So they may choose to answer some of them. They're great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get into more time for dialogue, but I think this was really a terrific session. And I would like to thank RBC and Western Diversification Canada for supporting the Rising Economy Week. I'd like to thank the Ambassador Hillman and Chargé d'Affaires Brucker for spending this important time with us, and for all of our panelists. Thank you so much for your preparation, for trying to squish all you wanted to say in 3 minutes and bearing with my timer. I really appreciate it. And I do want to suggest that this is a really important time for us to be putting forth ideas on how we can do better at the border and with trade. So that is Penware's mission, and I invite anyone to send us your thoughts and ideas. This is an important time that we can really, I think, leapfrog ahead and try to put in smart systems that will make us better off. So